Hello, everyone. This is Jon Bernys, Jonathan Bernys, talking to you all in my History of Poetry lecture series. And we are just here to talk about a very rather niche, um, but very, very interesting um, symbiotic history in sound poetry, which is the modern English translations of Hafiz's Persian poetry by Daniel Ladinsky. Um, and the reason I wanted to do this is because, very big, grandiose cosmic poetry is kind of what got me interested in it when I was a teenager. And um, I feel if I further elucidate on rather perfect examples of cosmic poetry, which is Daniel Ladinsky's translations of Hafiz, then hopefully I can inspire more young people to take poetry more seriously. Um, so before we start, I'm just going to give a pretty brief history of these two. So Hafiz of Shiraz in the 14th century is one of the greatest Sufi poets, renowned for his ecstatic verses about divine love and spiritual unity. And then there's Daniel Ladinsky, an American poet born in 1945, who has become famous for rendering Hafiz's poetry into contemporary English in works like The Gift and I Hear God Laughing. Ladinsky's versions of Hafiz are widely beloved for their delightful, ecstatic, and irreverent spirit, which has inspired countless readers. Although purists note that these poems are not direct translations from Persian, Ladinsky's work beautifully captures the cosmic and transcendent essence of Hafiz's mystical vision. We will explore how Ladinsky's approach transforms Hafiz's poetry into a kind of cosmic masterpiece or masterpieces, maintaining the original's otherworldly spirituality while reimagining it in a vibrant, accessible English. We will focus on a variety of these poems with special emphasis on the poem Everywhere. And the reason I chose that poem in particular to put the most emphasis on is because, when I think of cosmic poetry, I like to think of the biggest words I can think of, which is like universe, world, everything, everyone, everywhere. And the fact that one of the few poems you could find of these translations, one of the few poems you can find on the internet is titled Everywhere, I thought was super fitting. So we're going to put very special emphasis on that poem. And on all that, we're going to see how they exemplify cosmic poetry done right, transcending the material world through sublime imagery and insight. To understand the uniqueness of Ladinsky's Hafiz, one must recognize his approach to translation as spiritual and creative interpretation rather than literal scholarship. In the introduction to The Gift, Ladinsky recounts an astounding dream in which Hafiz appeared to him, quote unquote, as an infinite fountaining sun, as God, who sang hundreds of lines of his poetry to me in English, and then asked him to share that message with artists and seekers. In other words, Ladinsky feels he channels Hafiz's voice across centuries and languages. The result is a set of poems inspired by Hafiz, original English compositions that preserve the spirit of Hafiz's words rather than their exact form. From a scholarly perspective, this means Ladinsky's poems often depart from the historical Persian texts, yet they resonate on a spiritual level. The curator of poetry, Chaikhana, notes that The Gift contains no lines of poetry written by the great Sufi poet Hafiz, even as he admits he enjoys Ladinsky's playful and profound poetry for what it is. Um, in essence, Ladinsky prioritizes conveying Hafiz's cosmic consciousness, his sense of unity with the divine and joyous transcendence over a word-for-word translation. This approach has made Hafiz's wisdom accessible to a broad Western audience, much as Coleman Barks' renderings did for Rumi. Ladinsky's books have thus become gateways to Hafiz's mysticism for modern readers, emphasizing universal themes of love and unity and non-duality. Crucially, Ladinsky's work succeeds because he preserves the quote-unquote infinite tenderness, great exuberance, joy, and laughter, ecstatic love and fervent longing for the beloved, and wonder and delight at the divine splendor of the universe, end quote, that characterize Hafiz's spirit. These qualities are the hallmarks of cosmic poetry, poetry that points beyond the material realm to the boundless radiance of the divine, by infusing his English verses with cosmic imagery, sun, stars, fire, sky, and transcendent themes, unity, divine love, and annihilation of the ego. Ladinsky creates poems that feel as uplifting and otherworldly as the 14th century originals. And now we're going to dive into the poems themselves, beginning with one of the most celebrated examples, which is Everywhere. Maybe it's good that in my last attempt at doing this lecture, I didn't do the poem in its entirety. So maybe I should do that real quick. So I'm going to do the entire poem first. So it goes as follows. Running through the streets screaming, throwing rocks through windows, using my own head to ring great bells. Pulling out my hair, tearing off my clothes, trying everything I own to a stick, and setting it on fire. What else can Hafiz do tonight to celebrate the madness, the joy of seeing God everywhere? So, one of the most striking poems in Ladinsky's Hafiz canon is that poem, Everywhere. So in this poem, Hafiz, as voiced by Ladinsky, erupts in an ecstatic frenzy, a mad joy upon perceiving the divine beloved in all things. The poem opens with wild, liberating images, starting with running through the streets screaming, throwing rocks through windows using my own head to ring great bells, pulling out my hair, tearing off my clothes, trying everything I own to a stick, and setting it on fire. These vivid lines portray a mystic's divine madness. Hafiz is so overwhelmed by the revelation of God everywhere that he symbolically casts off all worldly constraints. He runs naked and free, destroying the ordinary markers of propriety and property. So it's a poetic dramatization of transcending the material world. The chaos he creates is not aimless. It's rather a celebration of truth so grand that it upends all normal behavior. Finally, the poem concludes with Hafiz himself asking what more he can do, quote, to celebrate the madness, the joy of seeing God everywhere. This last exclamation resounds like a triumphant shout. So the word everywhere is italicized in the original, or in Ladinsky's print, it is emphatically placed to underscore the central revelation, which is the divine is omnipresent and immanent in all creation. So the speaker's frenzied actions, ringing great bells with his hand, burning his possessions, now make sense as a response to an overwhelming vision of unity. In a state of enlightened intoxication, which is what the Sufis called madhab, the lover of God laughs at the norms of the mundane world, which I do too. So scholars of mysticism will recognize in Everywhere as an echo of classical Sufi themes, the beloved God pervading the cosmos, and the lover's heart must expand to meet him. So Ladinsky's rendering amplifies this with concrete, almost cinematic imagery. By using physical, visceral actions, screaming, ringing, bells and fire, He brings the ineffable experience to life in a way modern readers can viscerally understand. The result is a poem that feels both grounded in human experience and completely and utterly transcendent. It shows how an encounter with the infinite can unsettle and liberate the finite self. It is also worth noting how everywhere exemplifies Hafiz's irreverent humor and joy. So the scene is wild and mad almost, but it is also suffused with happiness, quote unquote, the joy of seeing God everywhere. So this joyful madness is far from despair. Like I said, it's a celebration. So Ladinsky channels, rather than translate, he channels Hafiz's famous penchant for blissful irreverence. The idea that when you see God in everything, conventional piety and sober restraint fall away in favor of spiritual laughter and freedom. In fact, another poem in Ladinsky's collection advises, quote unquote, start seeing everything as God, but keep it a secret. A playful suggestion that enlightenment is both simple and subversive. So the poem everywhere boldly shares that secret with the world in lines that any reader can picture and feel. Um, so thus, everywhere stands as a prime example of cosmic poetry done right. It translates an abstract mystical concept, God's omnipresence, into a vibrant human experience of transcendence. So through Ladinsky's artful English, we taste Hafiz's state of divine ecstasy, a state beyond the confines of the material world, the everyday infused with the sacred. Um, so let me see what I can do. So now I'm going to show you, I'm going to perform for you the poem Laughing at the Word Two. Only the illuminated one, who keeps seducing the formless into form, had the charm to win my heart. Only a perfect one, who is always laughing at the word two, can make you know of love. A core theme in Hafiz's mysticism is the unity of all existence in the divine. So Ladinsky's poem Laughing at the Word Two directly addresses this theme of non-duality. Here Hafiz speaks of the illuminated one who keeps seducing the formless into form, the only one capable of truly winning his heart. This line is a poetic reference to the Creator, the perfect one, who manifests the formless spiritual essence into the myriad forms of the world. It suggests that God entices the spiritual into material form, a cosmic flirtation that brings creation into being. And the punchline of this poem, as the title indicates, is that the perfect one is, quote unquote, always laughing at the word two. In other words, from the divine perspective of perfect unity, the very concept of two, separation of duality, is almost laughable. There is only one reality and one beloved to truly know of love, Hafiz implies. One must understand the oneness behind all things. And Ladinsky delivers this message with elegant simplicity, and even typographically, orthographically, isolating the word two on its own line for emphasis. So it's like a very, very old Dada poem, basically, when it comes to being visually centered rather than narratively centered. So the effect is almost visual. The reader pauses on that word two, which is meant to be, that word is a symbol of division, and then shares in the enlightened laughter that is supposed to follow. So by rendering Hafiz's insight in plain yet poetic English, Ladinsky makes a profound mystical truth accessible. So laughing at the word two invites us all to consider the cosmic joke that we are not truly separate from each other or from God. In the context of cosmic poetry, this is a joyful affirmation of unity. The poem's tone is light. One can almost picture a smiling saint chuckling at our tendency to see double. Yet, the underpinning idea is expansive and deep. It encourages the listener to move beyond the illusion of duality into a direct experience of the one love that underlies the universe. So now I'm going to perform for you I have learned so much. I have learned so much from God that I can no longer call myself a Christian, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Buddhist, a Jew. The truth has shared so much of itself with me that I can no longer call myself a woman, a man, an angel, or even pure soul. Love has befriended Hafiz so completely that it has turned to ash and freed me of every concept and image my mind has ever known. Another transcendent dimension of Ladinsky's Hafiz is the way it dissolves rigid identities and dogmas. So in that poem, I Have Learned So Much, which is the title, Hafiz declares that through the teachings of truth or God, he can no longer call himself a Christian, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Buddhist, or a Jew. So the poetry lists various religious labels only to cast them off one by one. So this powerful statement reflects a state of spiritual realization beyond sectarian boundaries. So Hafiz or Ladinsky suggests that genuine communion with the divine strips away all limited identifications, even affiliation with a particular faith tradition. The poem then goes even further. So Hafiz says the truth has shared so much with him that he can no longer call himself a man, a woman, an angel, or even pure soul. So all these categories of being, whether human, celestial, or even soul, have been transcended. In Sufi terms, this is the concept of fana, which means the annihilation of the self in God. So, and it says love has, quote unquote, befriended Hafiz so completely that his ego and all its concepts have turned to ash, freeing him from every image his mind ever knew. So Ladinsky's lines, love has befriended Hafiz so completely, it has turned to ash and freed me of every concept and image my mind has ever known, vividly convey this state of liberation through love. So the poem's cosmic quality lies in its utter expansiveness. By denying every label and identity, the speaker becomes limitless. He is not confined by religion, gender, or even the distinction of creature versus angel. It implies a unity with all of them, an identification only with the boundless truth itself. So the transcendence of this message is clear that in reaching God, Hafiz became one with everything, no longer separate or definable. So this is a theme found throughout mystical literature, but Ladinsky's accessible phrasing, starting lines with "I can no longer call myself," which is something a lot of people can relate to, it resonates with modern readers who sense that ultimate reality must be beyond our human definitions. Now, interestingly, this poem also reflects a kind of spiritual humanism and inclusivity. So by listing and then dropping each religion's name, Ladinsky's Hafiz reassures readers of any faith or no faith that these poems speak to the universal experience of the divine. So it's a gentle invitation, do not get caught up in labels, come experience the freedom of the infinite. So this generous universality is a key reason Ladinsky's work is cherished globally. As one commentator put it, his poetry, quote unquote, suggests a lot about the relationship between formal ideas of religion, genuine insight, freedom, and the poetic impulse. In I Have Learned So Much, that insight is front and center. So now we're going to read the Crystal Rim. The earth lifts its glass to the sun, and light is poured. A bird comes and sits on a crystal rim, and from my forest cave I hear singing. So I run to the edge of existence and join my soul in love. I lift my heart to God, and grace is poured. An emerald bird rises from inside me, and now sits upon the beloved's glass. I have left that dark cave forever. My body has blended with his. I lay my wing as a bridge to you, so that you can join us singing. So many of Ladinsky's translations employ cosmic nature imagery to represent mystical union. And this poem titled A Crystal Rim is a beautiful example of this. So in this poem, the natural world and the inner spiritual world mirror each other in a vision of union with the beloved. So the poem begins with an image of the earth lifting its glass to the sun and light being poured, as if the sunlight were a divine drink. So immediately we're in the realm of metaphor, the earth toasting the heavens. A bird then sits on a crystal rim and sings, which the poet hears from his forest cave. This draws the reclusive seeker, Hafiz in a cave, out to the edge of existence where he, quote unquote, joins his soul in love. As the poem progresses, the imagery becomes increasingly mystical. Quote unquote, I lift my heart to God, and grace is poured. An emerald bird rises from inside me, and now sits upon the beloved's grass. So here the earlier external scene, a bird on a crystal glass under the sun, transforms into an internal spiritual event. So the emerald bird emerging from the poet's own heart suggests the soul itself taking wing in the light of grace. So it perches on the beloved's glass, implying that the soul has joined God in the celebratory toast of love. And the climax of A Crystal Rim, this poem, is the realization of union. Quote unquote, I have left that dark cave forever. My body has blended with his. So Hafiz comes out of the darkness, which implies ignorance or separation, and declares his entire being merged with God, blended with his. The poem ends with the poet extending a metaphysical wing as a bridge for the reader. Quote unquote, I lay my wing as a bridge to you so that you can join us singing. So this closing invitation is both tender and cosmic. The individual self has become one with the beloved. Yet in that union, the poet does not disappear, but instead becomes a bridge for others to experience the same joy. So the circle of divine love widens to include all of us as we are invited into the cosmic song. In Ladinsky's hands, these images of sun, bird, cave, and emerald light all serve a cosmic purpose. They illustrate the journey of the soul from earthly darkness to celestial union. The poem operates on two levels, duality, outer and inner, material and spiritual, and fuses them. So the result is a rich symbolic portrayal of enlightenment. So readers can feel the warmth of the sun, see the glint of light on glass, hear the bird's song, and simultaneously intuit the mystical truth of the soul merging with the source. The language is simple yet very lyrical, making the cosmic concept of union with God graspable through natural imagery. So A Crystal Rim exemplifies Ladinsky's talent for using the tangible cosmos, the earth, the sun, the creatures, as metaphors for the divine embrace. Love is the funeral pyre. Love is the funeral pyre where I have laid my living body. All the false notions of myself that once caused fear, pain, have turned to ash as I neared God. What has risen from the tangled web of thought and sinew now shines with jubilation through the eyes of angels and screams the guts of infinite existence itself. Love is the funeral pyre where the heart must lay its body. Many of um, Many of Hafiz's poetry often speaks of dying to oneself in order to live in God. So Ladinsky's poem, Love is the Funeral Pyre, presents this theme with dramatic intensity. The very title is arresting. Love is likened to a funeral pyre, a fire in which one's very self is offered and burned. The poem begins, quote unquote, love is the funeral pyre where I have laid my living body. Right away, this line grabs our attention. The speaker has placed himself alive onto love's flames. This is a metaphor for self-sacrifice or ego death in the fire of divine love. As the poem continues, it details what the fire of love consumes. Quote unquote, All the false notions of myself that once caused fear and pain have turned to ash as I neared God. So this is a clear description of purification, and to me it might also mean self-forgiveness. So the false self with its fears and illusions is incinerated in proximity to the divine. By the time the speaker neared God, those falsities were gone. What remains after this burning? Ladinsky lines soar into cosmic imagery to describe the aftermath. Quote unquote, what has risen from the tangled web of thought in Sanu now shine with jubilation through the eyes of angels, and screams from the guts of infinite existence itself. So this incredibly beautiful line, this beautiful sentence, depicts a resurrection or transfiguration. From the ashes of the old self rises something radiant, as it's beautifully described, shining with jubilation. A new life or awareness that is so glorious that even angels see through its eyes. Moreover, this new life, quote unquote, screams from the guts of infinite existence, suggesting that it is now the voice of the cosmos itself proclaiming joy. The individual has expanded to become one with infinite existence. And then lastly, the poem reiterates its teaching, quote unquote, love is the funeral pyre where the heart must lay its body. In other words, to truly love God, one must surrender the heart completely, even if it feels like a death. So the reward of this surrender is a unification with the infinite, a theme illustrated by the cosmic scope of the language above. So Ladinsky's work makes this process visceral and emotional, so readers can feel the heat of the metaphorical fire, the pain of shedding old identities, and then the unbridled exaltation of what has risen in their place. And the real power of this poem comes from its paradoxical imagery of death as transformation. It's a very fine example of how cosmic poetry speaks through paradox. For example, one dying into a greater life, one being expanded by contracting into surrender. So the use of fire, which is a very primal cosmic element, connects to ancient mystical symbolism. Fire is divine presence and purification. So indeed, in many spiritual traditions, encountering the divine is described as touching fire. Moses with the burning bush, or Sufi saints with the flames of love. So Ladinsky taps into that archetypal imagery, delivering a poem that is both ancient in feel and imminent in impact. So love is the funeral pyre assures us that if we risk everything for love of the divine, we will gain a cosmic self far beyond the little self we relinquish. So now I'm going to go over a poem called The Great Religions. The great religions are the ships, poets the life, poets the lifeboats. Every sane person I know has jumped overboard. That is good for business, isn't it, Hafiz? While many of Ladinsky's poems are intensely ecstatic or sublime, some carry a lighter, mischievous tone while still conveying a transcendental insight. So The Great Religions, this poem, is a brief poem that winks at the reader even as it imparts wisdom. It states, the great religions are the ships, poets the lifeboats. Every sane person I know has jumped overboard. In these rather funny lines, formal religions are compared to large ships, whereas poets or spiritual poets like Hafiz or seers are the lifeboats that actually carry people to safety, which of course would mean enlightenment. The image suggests that truly sane seekers eventually leap out of the rigid structure of organized religion and into the small boats of direct experience and poetic truth. Hafiz then slyly asks, that is good for business, isn't it? Addressing himself in a humorous aside. So Ladinsky thus captures Hafiz's irreverent humor. The poet laughs that it's good for business if people abandon official dogmas for the guidance of poets like him. So in a meta sense, the poem teases that Hafiz's own popularity increases when people leave conventional religion, hence good for the poet's business. So this clever ending might make the reader smile, but it also holds a grain of spiritual seriousness. Commentator Ivan M. Granger notes that this poem winks knowingly at us, inviting us in on the joke. So the great religions invites readers to see beyond outer forms and institutions. So the cosmic perspective here values personal, poetic insight over dogmatic adherence. It suggests that the infinite sea of truth might be too vast for the formal ships of organized religion to contain. One might have to jump into the sea with a lifeboat of poetry to truly experience it. So this is perfectly in line with the Sufi ethos that truth is a path of love and direct experience, not just formal practice. Ladinsky's Hafiz, with a touch of comedy, encourages a kind of transcendence that is as playful as it is profound. So before concluding, let's briefly look at No Conflict, one of the shortest of the Ladinsky Hafiz poems. No conflict when the flute is playing, for then I see every moment emanates from God's holy dance. So this is just a few lines, and it paints a picture of like a cosmic oasis. The poem simply says, no conflict when the flute is playing, for then I see every moment emanates from God's holy dance. Despite its brevity, this two-line verse encapsulates a mystical vision. The flute here can be understood as a metaphor for the divine breath or cosmic music sustaining all creation, which in yogic terms, as a poetry Chaikhana commentary notes, the flute refers to the Sushumna or spiritual spine through which God's energy flows. When this divine music is perceived, when the flute is playing, the poet sees all motion in the world as part of God's holy dance. In such a state, naturally, there is no conflict. All dualities and oppositions resolve into the single rhythm of the divine movement. All of creation, all apparent movement, is just an expression of the divine radiance that animates everything in the cosmic dance, as Ivan Granger explains. This little poem gives us a snapshot of the cosmic play, or the Leela concept. The entire universe is God's dance, and everything that happens is choreographed by the holy music. For Hafiz, recognizing this truth instantly dissolves conflict and discord, so it is a miniature lesson in seeing the unity behind the diversity, the peace underlying the chaos. So Ladinsky's choice of simple language, or God's holy dance, makes the mystical idea immediately comprehensible. In just a few words, the poem delivers a serene panoramic viewpoint, envisioning life as a divine dance, and conflict will cease. So this is a gentle reminder that ties together many threads that we've discussed. Sorry. So like omnipresence of God, every movement is from God, non-duality being no conflict or opposites, joy, which is dance and music. The poem No Conflict may be short, but it is actually a very cosmic visual. So conclusion. With exploring Daniel Ladinsky's renderings of Hafiz's poetry, we have seen how they function as a generative art of the spirit, taking seeds of 14th century Sufi ideals and growing them into vibrant new forms in English. Through very, very bold imagery and an intuitive grasp of the mystical, Ladinsky manages to keep Hafiz's poetry transcendent and beyond the material world, even while rewriting it in the modern language. Precisely what makes his work so beloved among spiritual readers is each poem becomes an experience of the cosmos within. From the mad ecstasy of seeing God everywhere, to the gentle laughter at the illusion of two, to the ashes and flames of love's transformation, to the universal vision that erases religious boundaries. These translations demonstrate that true poetry of the sacred transcends time and culture. So by prioritizing a 14th century poet's cosmic themes, divine omnipresence, unity, ecstatic love, inner freedom, over a literal translation, Daniel Ladinsky has created English poems that stand on their own as sacred art. They feel fresh yet eternal, often prompting in readers the very astonishment that Hafiz experienced as he found the beloved everywhere. It is telling that such poems have inspired many to jump overboard from old paradigms and dive into spiritual seeking with open hearts. In scholarly terms, one can discuss whether to label Ladinsky's work as translation, interpretation, or maybe even channeling, but what is undeniable is the impact of these poems. They invite us in a very almost childlike simplicity to consider reality from a higher vantage point, the soul's view rather than the ego's. So the enduring popularity of books like The Gift attests to how well this approach works. Just as Hafiz's original Persian lines have been cherished for centuries for their beauty and wisdom, Ladinsky's English renditions continue to express the essence of life as the expression of beauty. It is poetry, which is fulfilling the role Hafiz envisioned for the role of the poet. So these poems exemplify cosmic poetry to me at its finest. It lifts us beyond the material plane, not by denying the world, but by revealing the divine dancing within the world. And through ecstatic humor, through luminous imagery, and heartfelt devotion, these poems open a door to the quote-unquote infinite fountaining sun of truth that Ladinsky saw in his dream. Stepping through that door, the reader might find themselves in a space where every being in every moment shines with the light of the beloved. And Hafiz's voice through Ladinsky becomes a guide in our own path and kind of encouraging us to keep singing and to celebrate the sacred that is ever present, no matter what our eyes see. These are all of the sources I used for my research on this lecture to educate the world about the beauty and the even more beautiful implications of these poems by Daniel Ladinsky, Hafiz. I sincerely hope you enjoyed this effort. This was not an easy lecture to put together by any definition. This took a long time to complete. So I sincerely hope you enjoy it, and any feedback, any positive feedback you can give me, I will gladly read it because I worked so hard on this. I sincerely hope you enjoyed or felt inspired by this. I just really hope this made you love poetry just a little bit more than before you heard this. And this is Jon Bernys signing off. Thank you.